In this presentation, we will record a donor pledge within QuickBooks Pro, QuickBooks Desktop. Here we are in our QuickBooks practice file. We currently have the open windows open. You can open the open windows by going to the View dropdown and going to the Open Windows list. We're now going to look at our Excel file to see what our objective will be. We're going to now be on 2B. It's going to be the transaction. We're going to be recording a pledge. That means basically we've got someone to promise to pay us money in the future at some point in time. If you compare that to a for-profit type of organization, that would be similar to us invoicing the client. In other words, we would say, hey, we did the work. We would like to, here's the invoice. You owe us money in the future. The other side going to revenue. Same kind of idea here, although we may not have provided any goods or services because it's a donation, but we have gotten a promise to pay. And that promise then is going to be recorded as a type of receivable, contributions receivable. So we're going to increase an asset account then to the contributions receivable. The other side then go into the contributions with donor restrictions. We're going to restrict it in this case due to the fact that there's a timing restriction. So we're going to say, hey, we got revenue. We're going to record the revenue, but we're going to say it's restricted because we haven't yet got the cash. All we have is a pledge. So we're going to put it, if we record that then, we're going to be increasing the receivable, an asset type of account. The other side is going to be increasing revenue. However, we're going to put it into another account called the contributions. So we want to do a similar thing within QuickBooks. In QuickBooks, however, we can break out the contributions using classes rather than having two accounts like this into a format where we would break it out similar to as we would see in the statement of activities, having the contributions for the restricted and the not without restriction. However, I kind of like having to have the two accounts within QuickBooks because that helps us give kind of a double check on the items that are going to be restricted and not restricted. So I'm still going to set up a separate account within QuickBooks and use the classes for it. We're also going to set up a job for the restriction. So we're actually going to use the jobs function within QuickBooks to set up anytime we have some kind of restricted item. And that'll help us to track the restricted items. You'll note that in this section, on this report, similar to as what we will have in QuickBooks, we have the restricted items on the statement of activities similar to the income statement type of report. Now, the restricted activities, there could be more than one of them here. Therefore, if we want to break out the activity, the types of restrictions that are involved and whether or not and when those restrictions had been fulfilled, we can use another function, which is going to be the jobs function. So now we're going to use jobs anytime I have a restricted item or am unrestricted something, I'm going to be using the jobs field. That'll also allow us to tie out when we close out the books to the proper net assets section, whether the net assets are restricted or without restrictions. So if we go back to QuickBooks then, what we're going to do is set up jobs now as well. So to do that, I'm going to go to the Customer tab up top. We're going to go to the Customer Center. So I'm going to go into the Customer Center. Now I'm actually going to set up a new customer. I'm going to say it's going to be a new customer here. And I'm just going to call it Jobs. That's going to be our parent category. So I'm going to say Jobs. And I'm not going to put any other detail. And I'm going to say OK. I would like to pull that to the top. I'm going to put my cursor on the diamond here and pull that to the top. I'd like that to be the first thing in our report. Then I'm going to put my cursor on that jobs field and go to the new customer job and this time add a job. And this is where I'm actually going to put the customer information. So this is going to be pledger number 1. So this is the first pledger we have. We could put then all the kind of information, contact information here as is needed. I'm going to then go to the job information down below, and I'm going to say that this is going to be the job status, and I would like to put this is going to be an in-progress job status. Then I'm going to say OK. So we'll say OK, and then that's going to be under the category of jobs. Then I'm going to go back to the Home tab. So we're going to go into the Home tab. We're going to create an invoice just like we would if we were a for-profit and we did work and now are invoicing it for the IOU. The invoice means that it's going to be basically an IOU. You could change the name of the form to a pledge or something like that as well. We're going to go to the jobs and I'm going to put the pledger 1 and then I'm going to say tab and we're going to put this into the restricted category. So it's going to be restricted. I'm going to put this as of the 3rd being the date. And then the item we're going to need to set up, I'm going to set up a new item, and it's going to be called a pledge. So we're going to set up that item. Remember, the item is going to drive where the income account is going to go. So it's going to be a pledge. We're going to say yes to set up the item. We're going to set it up as a service item. And then it's going to be a pledge. I'll copy that and put that in the description as well. The account that it should be going to is going to be, as we can see here in our example, it's going to be to the contributions with restrictions. So I'm going to say contributions restricted. So back to QuickBooks, we're going to look for the contributions restricted. So if we type in contribution, we have unrestricted, and now I'm going to put restricted. Contribution restricted tab. We're going to set up that account, set it up. It's going to be an income type of account. That looks good. That's all we need. We're going to say save and close and OK. So there we have the pledge, and the amount that we want is for the 108. So we're going to say the rate is going to be the 108,000, and the class is restricted. So that looks good. And we've got the class up top, and see if we can make the rate a little bit bigger here. The rate and the job up top. So then we're going to say save and close. This should increase the receivable, and the other side should be going to a revenue type of account, but this time the restricted revenue. So we're going to say save and close and say yes. Then we're going to go to our reports up top. We're going to go to the reports drop down. Let's first take a look at our trial balance, which is going to be under the account and taxes, and then the trial balance. So we'll take a look at the trial balance, changing the dates up top from 01/01/20, 12/31/20, January through December 2020. What we have done is increase the accounts receivable, the other side going to the contributions, which are going to be restricted. Now, we can also see this information if we go to the profit and loss. Let's take a look at the profit and loss by class. Reports up top. We're going to go to the company and financial. Then we're going to look at the profit and loss by class. Profit and loss by class, changing the dates up top from 01/01/20 to 12/31/20, January through December. Then we have our fundraising class. We've got the total unrestricted and then the restricted. If I minimize this column, then you can see we basically have what's forming up if I go back to Excel to look like if I go back to our example tab and scroll down to the statement of activities. We got something that's starting to look like the statement of activities here. And that means that we're going to have the unrestricted and the restricted in the column type of format. The restricted now showing that 108 and in the revenue and the 108 in the total. Now we can also run the profit and loss by job now to get more detail on the restricted items. Because remember, this is going to include more than one possible restricted type of item in here. If we want to get the detail within it, then we can run the jobs report by going to the reports drop down up top. We can then go to the company and financial. You can go to the profit and loss by job. You can also find that report, by the way, by going to the jobs, time, and so on. And then we want to look at the profit and loss by job report. So either way, you can get in there. And then we're going to change the dates up top from 01/01/20 to 12/31/20. And there's going to be our profit and loss by job. Now note that this is basically showing all of the customers here. We've got the donor 1 and donor 2. And then we put the jobs in the subcategory. So the pledges are going to be under the pledges here. So if I was to minimize this, you've got the jobs, and then if you're going to maximize out the jobs, and again, it's freezing on me to maximize it back out. Oh, there it goes. So then we got the maximize for the jobs, and then we've got the pledges here for the jobs. So it'll list out those jobs. Now, another way you can format this report, and you may want to do this if you do not want to go as we did with the customer field. You'll recall we went to the customers and the customer center, and I put the customer under the subfield of jobs. Now, another way you can filter this report if you would rather not do that is you could filter it by the status as we set up. So I could say, or if you want to do it or not do it, you could still filter by the status. So, for example, if I want to just see the pledges or the open status items, I can then go to the customize reports up top. We can go to the filters. And then if I scroll down here, I'm looking for the status. So I'm going to scroll down and we have the job status. Job status is the one we want. Drop down. We're going to say we want the in progress job status and then OK. And so now we've got it filtered by just those job statuses. Now, if we add up the total in the job statuses, there's only one in it right now. It should tie out to the profit and loss. If I had multiple jobs, in other words, and then I minimize this thing, which it's freezing on me again, but I would just see the total of the 108. That should tie out if we go to the profit and loss by class as the same amount in the restricted column. That's going to be a key point. Also, the job reports can help us to tie out to the balance sheet. So let's take a look at the balance sheet. If I go to the reports up top, we go to the company and financial, and then the balance sheet standard. And we change this item to be 123120. You'll note that as the current year is going, it's going into the net income. But eventually, and that's kind of a funny QuickBooks type of thing, after the first year, it'll roll into some type of equity account, which in our case for a not-for-profit organization is net position. So let's go to the next year, January of the next year. You'll have the same report, but this net income will change from net income to unrestricted net position. Now note that not all of it is unrestricted. We'll have to make an adjustment for that. The amount that's not unrestricted is going to be the amount that are the restricted items, and we'll be able to tie that out by looking at the jobs report that's going to have the list of jobs that are going to be the unrestricted items. So in other words, the jobs that we're going to say are open, the pledges here that are going to be open if we have them all lined up, should basically tie out to the equity section or the net position section of the restricted items on the profit and loss. We'll take a look at that at the end of the time period as we do that adjusting entry. Now, if we go back to the balance sheet then, the other report that's going to be important here is to say who owes us the money on the accounts receivable. Who owes us that money? That's going to be some type of AR report, detailed report. We're going to go to the reports drop down. We're going to go to the customers and receivable. We want the accounts receivable detail, the customer balance detail report. And then I'm going to say, well, that's all we need right now. We have only the one pledger one right now is the only receivable we have on the books. If we double click on that, we can then go to the invoice that has been set up for it. Closing this back out, there we have it.